When Jennifer first stepped into her friend Akiko's kitchen outside Tokyo, nothing about it looked revolutionary. The room was smaller than Jennifer's kitchen back home in Ohio. There was no enormous island, no walk-in pantry, no wall of matching appliances, and certainly no collection of expensive gadgets. A rice cooker sat beside the refrigerator. Several pans hung neatly near the stove. A few knives rested where they could be reached easily. Food containers were stacked in one cabinet, bowls and plates in another. It was an ordinary family kitchen, but within a few days, Jennifer noticed something unusual. Akiko seemed willing to throw away certain kitchen items much sooner than Jennifer ever would. A stained food container disappeared. A badly worn sponge was replaced. A bowl with a small crack was removed from daily use. A cutting board with deep grooves did not earn another year of service simply because it technically still worked. Jennifer found this almost wasteful at first. Back home, she had kitchen tools that had survived college, 2 moves, a marriage, and almost 15 years of dinners. If a plastic container still had a lid, she kept it. If a frying pan still held food, she cooked with it. If a plate had only a small chip, she placed the damaged side toward the back of the cabinet. Frugality, she believed, meant using things until they were almost impossible to use. But Akiko approached the question differently. Matanai, the Japanese reluctance to waste something that still has value, did not mean keeping an object forever. It meant using it properly while it still served its purpose. Once a food contact item became damaged, difficult to clean, unsuitable for heat, or uncertain in its intended use, keeping it could stop being frugal. Jennifer slowly realized that the most expensive kitchen item is sometimes the cheap object a household refuses to retire. The first moment came after lunch. Jennifer had saved part of a restaurant meal in a thin plastic takeout container. The next afternoon, she took it from the refrigerator, loosened the lid, and headed toward the microwave. Akiko stopped her and looked at the bottom of the container. There was no clear indication that it had been designed for microwave reheating. Jennifer shrugged. She had done this hundreds of times. Plastic was plastic. If it did not visibly melt, she assumed it was fine. But Japanese consumer labeling for plastic kitchenware specifically distinguishes products that can and cannot be used in microwave ovens because plastics have different heat tolerances and intended uses. The microwave itself was not the problem. The container was the question. Some plastics are designed for reheating. Others are designed only to carry or store food. Heat from the food can deform unsuitable containers or increase the transfer of substances from the material. Jennifer began thinking about the drawer at home filled with random deli tubs, takeout boxes, yogurt containers, and old food storage pieces. Most had become universal containers simply because they were free. Some went into the freezer, some went into the microwave, some held hot soup. Nobody remembered what they had originally been designed to do. Akiko transferred the food into a ceramic bowl. The extra step took perhaps 15 seconds. Jennifer suddenly understood that reuse and misuse were not the same thing. That thought followed her when she noticed Akiko examining an old plastic storage container. The container was not broken, but the surface had become cloudy and scratched after years of washing. A faint smell remained even after it had been cleaned. Jennifer would have kept it indefinitely. Akiko replaced it. Again, Jennifer wondered whether this contradicted the whole Japanese reputation for avoiding waste, but the distinction became clearer. A good reusable container can prevent enormous amounts of disposable packaging, but reusable does not mean immortal. Heat-repeated washing scratches, staining odors, and age can eventually change a plastic object. American health agencies advise consumers to use food containers for their intended purpose and to avoid damaged, stained, or unpleasant-smelling plastic containers, particularly when heat is involved. Japan regulates synthetic resin food utensils and packaging as food contact materials and requires use instructions for products whose heat or microwave limitations matter. Akiko was not frightened of all plastic. Her kitchen contained plenty of it. She simply did not treat every plastic object as equally appropriate for every job forever. Jennifer thought about the old container she used to microwave tomato sauce at home. Its inside permanently orange. Its lid warped enough that one corner never quite closed. She had considered that evidence of durability. Now it looked more like evidence that the container had already told her when it wanted to retire. A similar lesson appeared with plastic wrap. Jennifer often stretched whatever wrap was available tightly across a bowl and placed the bowl into the microwave. If the wrap softened or sagged, she simply pulled it away afterward. In Akiko's kitchen, instructions mattered more. Products intended for microwave use were used within the conditions printed on them. Products not intended for that use did not become microwave safe simply because they looked similar. The Japanese labeling system even requires plastic kitchen products to state relevant microwave precautions depending on material and use. Jennifer realized how often Americans treat a category name as an instruction manual: plastic container, plastic wrap, silicone mold, non-stick pan. If two objects look alike, they feel interchangeable, but food contact materials are designed around temperature, type of food, and conditions of use. Akiko's rule was surprisingly simple. If the household no longer knows what an item was designed to do not ask it to perform the most demanding job in the kitchen. The frying pan challenged Jennifer even more because this time the object was not old. Akiko owned a non-stick pan, which immediately destroyed Jennifer's growing theory that Japanese households had somehow abandoned synthetic coatings entirely. They had not. Non-stick cookware is widely used in Japan, just as it is elsewhere. The difference was how Akiko treated it. She never placed the empty pan over high heat and walked away while preparing ingredients. Jennifer did that constantly at home. The burner came on first. Then she chopped onions, opened the refrigerator, answered a question, and eventually returned to a pan that was extremely hot. Current risk assessments do not support the claim that properly used PTFE nonstick cookware is poisoning families. In fact, regulators report that migration into food under intended use is very low. The real warning is overheating. At sufficiently high temperatures, an empty PTFE-coated pan can overheat and release fumes that are hazardous. Jennifer had spent years being afraid of microscopic scratches while ignoring the far more practical problem of leaving an empty pan on high heat. Akiko's pan was not magical or chemical-free. She simply used it the way it had been designed to be used. When the coating eventually became badly deteriorated or the pan no longer performed properly, she would replace it rather than turning 15 years of ownership into a badge of honor. Frugality did not mean demanding immortality from cookware. Then Jennifer found an aluminum pot at the back of Akiko's cabinet. It looked ordinary, and Akiko still used it for appropriate cooking. That also challenged another internet myth. Jennifer had heard that all aluminum cookware was dangerous and should be thrown away. The truth was much less dramatic. Aluminum cookware has been used safely for decades, but condition and food type matter. Worn or pitted aluminum can transfer more material into food, and acidic or salty foods can increase that transfer. Jennifer suddenly remembered an old aluminum saucepan at home with a deeply worn interior. She regularly used it for tomato sauce because it was exactly the right size. The problem was not the existence of aluminum in the kitchen. The problem was pairing badly worn cookware with foods that were especially reactive and then pretending the condition of the surface no longer mattered. Akiko's habit was again frustratingly reasonable. Materials had jobs. Damage changed those jobs. A pan that was fine for one use was not automatically ideal for every use. Copper told the same story more clearly. Beautiful copper cookware can last generations, but cooking surfaces made from reactive copper are generally lined because large amounts of copper can transfer into food, especially when the protective lining is damaged and acidic foods are involved. Jennifer owned a decorative copper pot inherited from a relative. Its interior lining had worn thin in places. She occasionally used it because the pot looked expensive and old, which somehow made it feel safer than a cheap modern pan. Akiko saw it differently when Jennifer showed her a photograph. Age was history, not a safety certification. If protective lining was damaged, the correct solution was repair relining when appropriate, retirement from cooking, or replacement, not sentimental optimism. This was one of the first moments Jennifer understood how dangerous the phrase "they don't make them like they used to" can become in a kitchen. Sometimes older really does mean beautifully made. Sometimes older means the surface designed to keep food away from a reactive material is no longer doing its job. A few days later, a child dropped a lightweight bowl on the floor. It did not shatter, but a small crack appeared near the rim. Jennifer expected Akiko to keep it for snacks or dry foods. Instead, the bowl was removed from normal service. It was made from a resin similar to the melamine tableware used in many homes, schools, cafeterias, and restaurants. Properly manufactured melamine tableware is not automatically toxic, another distinction Jennifer was beginning to appreciate. The concern increases when poor quality or badly damaged products are exposed to conditions they were not designed for. Cracks, chips, heavy wear, and excessive heat are reasons to pay attention rather than reasons to celebrate how long a cheap plate has survived. Food contact regulations exist precisely because materials can transfer chemicals under certain conditions, and Japan, like the United States, sets standards for utensils and containers that touch food. Akiko's decision was not driven by panic. A bowl costs little compared with the uncertainty created when a food contact surface becomes damaged enough that nobody can clean or evaluate it properly. The ceramic dishes were even more interesting because they looked safer than plastic. Jennifer loved old pottery. Her kitchen contained handmade bowls from flea markets, brightly painted mugs purchased during vacations, and several antique dishes inherited from family. Akiko also loved ceramics, but she was careful about what was used for food. A decorative piece was not automatically a dinner bowl. A badly damaged glaze was not ignored because the dish was beautiful. Regulators in the United States warn that some antique handmade, damaged, heavily worn, or poorly manufactured pottery can leach lead from certain glazes. Properly manufactured, everyday ceramic ware is far less likely to present this problem, but unknown origin changes the calculation. Jennifer thought about a brightly painted old bowl she regularly used for salsa because it looked festive. She had no idea who made it when it was made, whether the glaze was intended for food or whether it had ever been tested. The correct lesson was not to fear ceramics. It was almost the opposite. Modern food-safe ceramic ware is a useful alternative precisely because it is designed for food contact. The risky object was the beautiful mystery bowl promoted from decoration to cookware simply because it happened to hold food. Back at Akiko's sink, Jennifer encountered an object no viral toxic kitchen video would probably place near the top of the list: the cutting board. Akiko replaced a deeply worn board that Jennifer thought still had years left. There were no chemicals to fear. The problem was physical damage. Deep grooves are harder to clean thoroughly and can trap residues. Japanese food safety guidance tells households to wash cutting boards, knives, towels, brushes, and sponges carefully, and where appropriate, sanitize them, particularly after raw meat and fish. A surface designed to be cleaned needs to remain cleanable. Jennifer's main cutting board at home looked like a road map. Years of knife marks crossed every direction. She scrubbed it vigorously and assumed effort compensated for condition. But once a surface became deeply damaged, replacing it could be more sensible than repeatedly fighting the same grooves. Again, Akiko was not throwing away useful objects casually. She was recognizing the point where an object's damage had changed its basic function. The same logic applied to wooden utensils and chopsticks. Wood itself was not the enemy. Japanese kitchens obviously use wooden chopsticks, rice paddles, spoons, and other tools every day. But Akiko inspected them. A smooth wooden utensil that could be washed and dried was useful. One that had split deeply, developed rough cracks, or remained permanently discolored earned closer attention. Jennifer had a wooden spoon at home with a long split running through the bowl. She had kept it because the crack gave it character. But character was not what she needed from a tool stirring wet food. Moisture and residue could enter damaged areas that were difficult to clean and dry. Akiko's approach was not replace wood with plastic or replace plastic with wood. That kind of material warfare made little sense. The real rule was more practical. Choose a suitable material, use it correctly, keep it clean, and recognize when physical damage has made proper maintenance unrealistic. Then came the sponge. Jennifer's sponge at home lived beside the sink until one of two things happened. It began to smell noticeably bad, or it physically started falling apart. She sometimes microwaved it because she had heard that would sterilize it and reset the clock. Akiko's sponge did not receive such heroic medical treatment. It was rinsed, allowed to drain and dry as well as possible, kept reasonably clean, and replaced when it became heavily soiled or worn. Japanese government food safety advice specifically reminds households that sponges, brushes, towels, and dishcloths themselves need cleaning. The cleaning tool does not possess permanent moral purity simply because its job is to remove dirt. Jennifer suddenly saw the absurdity. A sponge might scrub raw food residue, wipe a plate, clean the sink, absorb moisture, sit damp for hours, and then be trusted again because someone squeezed dish soap onto it. Of all the inexpensive objects in the kitchen, the sponge was one of the strangest places to prove a commitment to extreme longevity. The dishcloth was worse. Jennifer's kitchen towel might dry washed hands, wipe a little water from the counter, catch a coffee spill, move a hot pan, clean crumbs from the table, and remain hanging from the oven door until the next morning. It was the kitchen's universal employee. Akiko treated cloths according to purpose and condition. Clean, dry cloths entered food preparation work. Damp, dirty ones left it. Japanese home food safety guidance explicitly advises replacing towels and dishcloths with clean, dry ones before cooking. Jennifer realized that the danger was not the existence of cloth, it was task confusion. A cloth that had just wiped dirty water from one surface did not become clean because it was folded neatly afterward. She began imagining the invisible network created by one towel traveling from hand to countertop to sink to cutting board area and back again. Separating tasks did not require buying expensive disposable products. It required more frequent laundering and fewer imaginary assumptions about what looks clean. The final item was something Jennifer once considered environmentally responsible, an enormous collection of reusable food containers with missing lids, cracked seals, warped edges, scratched interiors, and mysterious origins. Her cabinet at home was so full that finding a matching lid became an evening puzzle. She kept every container because throwing reusable plastic away felt wasteful, but the collection had become the opposite of practical. Some containers could not seal properly. Some were not suitable for reheating. Some had no identifiable markings left. Some were so stained nobody wanted to store fresh food in them. Because there were too many, the family constantly bought new ones while refusing to discard the damaged ones. Akiko's cabinet contained fewer containers, but everyone had a clear purpose. Lids matched. The containers stacked. Microwave suitability was known. Damaged pieces left the system. Jennifer realized that keeping an unusable object does not rescue it from waste. It simply moves the waste into a cabinet and charges rent in the form of space and frustration. By the end of her visit, Jennifer understood why the phrase toxic kitchen item could be both useful and dangerously misleading. The internet likes simple villains. Plastic is toxic. Non-stick is toxic. Aluminum is toxic. Old dishes are toxic. Throw everything away and buy 13 replacements through a link below. Real kitchens are not that simple. Properly manufactured food contact materials are regulated for intended uses. FDA data, for example, do not support the claim that properly used PTFE nonstick pans are poisoning people through normal food migration. Japan itself uses plastic containers, nonstick cookware, aluminum melamine, wooden utensils, sponges, and many of the same materials found in Western kitchens. What Jennifer had actually discovered was far more useful. An ordinary object can become a bad kitchen tool when the household ignores its limits. A takeout box is not automatically a microwave container. A reusable plastic tub is not required to survive forever. A non-stick pan should not be heated empty until it smokes. A worn, reactive metal surface deserves attention. A protective lining matters. A cracked dish is different from an intact dish. A decorative ceramic is not automatically food safe. A cutting board must remain cleanable. A wooden tool must be able to dry. A sponge and dishcloth need to be treated as objects that can become dirty themselves. And a cabinet full of damaged reusable containers is not sustainability. The Japanese lesson was not really about replacing 13 American products with 13 magical Japanese alternatives. It was about respecting intended use. Japan's food contact regulations use safety standards for synthetic resins, utensils, containers, and packaging. Consumer labeling tells people when products are or are not appropriate for microwaves and other conditions. Household food safety guidance repeatedly returns to the condition and cleanliness of the tools touching food. That is less exciting than claiming an entire country discovered a secret toxin. It is also much more useful. When Jennifer returned home, she did not empty her kitchen into the trash. She did something harder. She inspected it. The clearly microwave-safe containers stayed. The warped takeout tubs went. Her intact non-stick pan stayed, but she stopped preheating it empty on high while chopping vegetables. The badly worn saucepan was retired from acidic sauces. The cracked wooden spoon finally left. Her mystery decorative pottery returned to decoration until she could determine whether it belonged in food service. The cutting board with trenches deep enough to hold yesterday's dinner was replaced. Half of the container cabinet disappeared because the lids no longer matched anything. The sponge no longer needed to smell terrible before earning retirement. Fresh dishcloths became part of cooking rather than an afterthought. The kitchen looked almost the same afterward. That was the surprising part. There was no expensive Japanese cookware set, no shelf of wellness products, no dramatic detox, only fewer damaged objects and clearer rules about the ones that remained. And perhaps that is the better definition of a non-toxic kitchen. Not a kitchen where every piece of plastic has been replaced by glass. Not a kitchen where every pan is cast iron. Not a kitchen built around fear of chemistry. A safer kitchen is one where the household knows what its tools are made to do, uses them within those limits, keeps them clean enough to perform their job, and lets them go when damage makes that job uncertain. Jennifer had spent years believing that throwing something away was always wasteful. Japan taught her a more complicated version of motteinai. Wasting a useful object is unfortunate, but keeping an object after it has stopped being safely useful does not honor it. Sometimes the most responsible thing a household can do is use something well, maintain it carefully, recognize when its working life is over, and replace only what genuinely needs replacing. That may not sound as dramatic as 13 toxic objects hiding in an American kitchen, but once a household starts looking closely at the scratches, cracks, stains, warped lids, overheated pans, mystery glazes, and permanently damp cleaning tools it touches every day, the kitchen can suddenly look very different. And the first item that needs replacing may already be sitting beside the sink.